Have you ever experienced that moment when everything you thought you knew about yourself suddenly crumbles? When the foundations of your entire existence seem to shake beneath your feet, leaving you standing in the ruins of what you once called your life? I am talking about that specific kind of crisis that does not announce itself with fanfare but arrives silently in the night of your soul. That moment when you look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back at you. When the roles you have played for so long no longer fit. When the masks you have worn to navigate this world suddenly feel suffocating. This is not just about losing a job or ending a relationship, though these external events can certainly trigger it. I am speaking of something far deeper, that existential earthquake that Manly Palmer Hall understood so profoundly, that complete dismantling of the false self that must occur before the authentic self can emerge from the ashes of our constructed identities. For years I walked through life believing I had figured it out, convinced that success, recognition, and the accumulation of experiences would somehow fill that nameless void I felt inside. I performed my part perfectly, said the right things, pursued the acceptable goals, and yet with each achievement, the emptiness only grew more pronounced, more impossible to ignore. It was only when everything collapsed, when the carefully built tower of my ego came crashing down in a crisis so profound, it felt like a death, that I finally began to understand what Hall had been trying to communicate through his decades of teaching. He knew something that most of us spend our entire lives avoiding, that true wisdom, real spiritual awakening, genuine self-knowledge cannot come through comfort and certainty, but only through the complete dissolution of everything we think we are. The ancient mystery schools that Hall dedicated his life to studying understood this fundamental principle of transformation. The initiates who sought entrance into these sacred temples were not promised easy answers or quick enlightenment. Instead, they were told they would have to die before they could be reborn, that they would have to descend into the darkest chambers of their own psyche, confront every shadow, every fear, every repressed aspect of themselves before they could emerge into the light of true understanding. This was not metaphorical death they were speaking of, but a genuine psychological and spiritual dismantling, a crisis that would shake them to their very core. Hall recognized that modern humanity had lost touch with this essential teaching, that we had created a culture that promises fulfillment through external acquisition, while carefully avoiding the interior work that genuine transformation requires. We are sold the illusion that if we just work hard enough, think positive enough, manifest our desires properly, we can bypass the necessary descent into our own underworld. But the universe, in its infinite wisdom, does not allow us to avoid this journey indefinitely. Sooner or later, usually when we least expect it and are least prepared, crisis arrives to shatter our comfortable illusions and force us to look at the truth we have been avoiding. The question is not whether this crisis will come, but whether we will recognize it as the gift it truly is, whether we will have the courage to see it not as a punishment or random misfortune, but as the invitation it represents. A summons from our own soul calling us back to authenticity, back to the path we may have abandoned long ago in favor of safety and social approval. Hall often spoke about the concept of the secret destiny, the idea that each soul comes into this world with a unique purpose, a specific contribution to make to the grand design of existence. But he also understood that very few people ever fulfill this destiny because they become so identified with their social conditioning, their family expectations, their cultural programming, that they never even hear the call of their authentic self. The voice of the true self is quiet, subtle, easily drowned out by the noise of the world and the demands of survival. So the soul uses crisis as a megaphone, as a way to break through all that noise and get our attention. When everything external collapses, when the structures we have relied upon crumble, when the identities we have clung to dissolve, suddenly there is space for that deeper voice to be heard. This is why Hall taught that crisis should not be feared but welcomed, not as a masochist would welcome suffering, but as a seeker welcomes the removal of obstacles between themselves and truth. Every crisis contains within it the seeds of our liberation, if we have eyes to see and the courage to embrace the transformation it demands of us. The Hermetic tradition that Hall spent his life exploring teaches that as above, so below, as within, so without. This means that the external crises we experience in our lives are always reflections of internal conflicts we have not yet resolved, shadow aspects we have not yet integrated, truths about ourselves we have not yet accepted. When your career falls apart, it is not random bad luck but a message from your deeper self that you have been investing your energy in something that does not align with your true purpose. When relationships crumble, it is not because you are unlovable but because you have been relating from a false self, wearing masks that prevent genuine intimacy and connection. When your health breaks down, your body is speaking to you about the ways you have been ignoring its needs, pushing past your limits, treating yourself as a machine rather than a sacred vessel for consciousness. Hall understood that the universe is not punishing us with these crises but educating us, that each breakdown is actually a breakthrough, waiting to happen, if we can shift our perspective and see the deeper pattern at work. The first stage of transformation through crisis is what we might call the collapse of the known. This is when everything you have relied upon suddenly proves unreliable, when the ground you thought was solid turns out to be quicksand, when the beliefs you held most dear are revealed to be mere concepts rather than ultimate truth. This stage is characterized by confusion, disorientation, and often a sense of profound despair. You may feel like you are going crazy, like you are the only person who sees through the collective illusion, like no one understands what you are going through. This isolation is part of the process because the transformation you are undergoing cannot happen while you are still embedded in your old social matrix, still playing by the old rules, still seeking validation from people who are invested in you remaining who you used to be. Hall recognized that genuine seekers must often walk alone for a time, not because they are antisocial, but because the metamorphosis they are undergoing requires a temporary withdrawal from the world, a period in the cocoon where the old form completely dissolves before the new form can emerge. During this stage, everything that is not truly you begins to fall away. The career that was never really yours, the relationships that were based on mutual dysfunction rather than genuine love, the beliefs you inherited rather than discovered, the habits that served someone else's agenda for your life rather than your own soul's calling. This falling away is painful because we have mistakenly identified with these things, believing that they are who we are, rather than simply roles we have been playing or costumes we have been wearing. The second stage of transformation is what the alchemists called the nigredo, the blackening, the dark night of the soul. This is when you have lost your old identity but have not yet discovered your new one, when you exist in a kind of liminal space between worlds, no longer who you were but not yet who you are becoming. This is perhaps the most difficult stage because humans crave certainty. We want to know who we are, where we are going, what it all means. But this stage demands that we surrender our need for certainty, that we learn to rest in the unknown, to trust the process even when we cannot see where it is leading. Hall taught that this darkness is not empty but full, pregnant with possibility, rich with potential. It is the void from which all creation emerges, the fertile darkness of the womb where new life gestates before birth. Many people abort the transformation at this stage because they cannot tolerate the uncertainty, the loss of control, the feeling of being lost. They rush back to their old patterns, their familiar dysfunctions, anything to escape the discomfort of not knowing. But those who have the courage to remain in the darkness, to let the old self completely die without prematurely grasping for a new identity, these are the ones who undergo genuine transformation. They discover that their true self, their authentic being, has been there all along beneath the layers of conditioning, waiting patiently to be uncovered. This true self does not need to be constructed or created because it already exists. It simply needs to be revealed through the removal of everything that is covering it up. During this dark stage, you may experience what feels like depression, but is actually something quite different. Clinical depression is often a biochemical imbalance or a psychological condition rooted in trauma that requires professional treatment. But what Hall would call the sacred depression of transformation is something else entirely, a natural and necessary response to the death of the false self. This sacred sadness is your soul mourning the loss of illusions, grieving the wasted years spent in service to agendas that were never truly yours, feeling the weight of all the times you betrayed your own inner knowing in favor of external validation. This grief must be honored, must be felt fully because it is clearing away the debris of your past so that your future can emerge unobstructed. Hall often quoted the ancient mystery teachings that said the soul must be emptied before it can be filled, that we must become nothing before we can become everything. This is not nihilism or pessimism, but a profound spiritual technology, a recognition that our egoic self, with all its agendas and fears and desires, is actually an obstacle to the expression of our divine nature. The crisis breaks down the ego not to destroy us, but to liberate us from its tyranny, to reveal the vast consciousness that we truly are beneath the small, separate self we have mistakenly believed ourselves to be. The third stage of transformation is what we might call the emergence of authentic being. This is when you begin to sense who you truly are beneath all the conditioning, when your real values begin to surface, when your genuine desires make themselves known, when you start to hear the voice of your own soul speaking its truth. This stage is characterized by a sense of coming home to yourself, of finally feeling aligned, of experiencing moments of genuine peace, even in the midst of external chaos. You start to make different choices, not because you should or because someone else expects it, but because these choices feel authentic, feel true to who you are becoming. You may find yourself drawn to different people, different activities, different ways of spending your time. Things that used to matter greatly suddenly seem trivial, and things you never paid attention to suddenly become fascinating. This is not random, but reflects the emergence of your true self with its own unique interests, gifts, and path. Hall taught that every person has what he called a signature vibration, a unique frequency that is theirs alone, and that our job is not to become something we are not, but to tune ourselves to this signature frequency, to resonate with our own authentic note in the grand symphony of existence. As this authentic self emerges, you may face resistance from your external world. The people who knew you before may not recognize this new version of you, may try to pull you back into your old patterns because your transformation threatens their own illusions, makes them uncomfortable with their own unlived lives. This is where the real test comes, where you must choose between returning to the familiar prison of your false self or continuing forward into the uncertain territory of authentic being. Hall warned that many seekers fail at this stage, that the pull of the familiar, the desire for social approval, the fear of disappointing others can be strong enough to derail the entire transformational process. He taught that we must be willing to let go of relationships that are based on our false self, recognizing that if people cannot accept and celebrate the real you, then they were never truly your people to begin with. This does not mean being cruel or cutting people off harshly, but it does mean having clear boundaries, being willing to outgrow relationships that no longer serve your highest evolution, trusting that as you become more authentic, you will naturally attract people who resonate with your true frequency. The ancient Greeks had a concept they called demon, which was not the demonic entity Christianity later made it, but rather your inner guiding spirit, your unique genius, the divine spark within you that knows your purpose and is always trying to guide you toward its fulfillment. Hall believed that crisis is often the demon's way of getting our attention when we have strayed too far from our path, when we have ignored its subtle guidance for so long that it must now speak through the louder voice of suffering and collapse. He taught that if we learn to listen to the whispers of the demon, to pay attention to our intuition, our dreams, our moments of deep knowing, we might be able to make necessary changes before crisis forces them upon us. But most of us are too busy, too distracted, too invested in maintaining our illusions to hear these whispers, so the demon must eventually shout, and its shout comes in the form of crisis. The wise person, according to Hall, is not someone who never experiences crisis, but someone who recognizes crisis as guidance, who understands that the universe is not against them, but for them, conspiring to return them to their authentic path no matter how painful the course correction might be. Jung, whose work Hall greatly admired, spoke of the process of individuation, becoming who you truly are, as distinct from who your parents wanted you to be, who society expects you to be, who your culture has programmed you to be. He recognized that this process almost always involves what he called a confrontation with the shadow, those aspects of ourselves we have denied, repressed, or projected onto others. The shadow contains not only our so-called negative qualities like anger, selfishness, or aggression, but also our positive qualities that we were taught were unacceptable, our power, our sexuality, our creativity, our wildness, our authentic desires. Many people go through life having never met their shadow, never integrated these disowned aspects of themselves, and as a result they remain fragmented, partial, never fully themselves. Crisis has a way of bringing the shadow to the surface, forcing us to confront all the parts of ourselves we have been avoiding. This confrontation can be terrifying because we are meeting aspects of ourselves we may not recognize or may actively dislike, but it is also absolutely necessary for wholeness. Hall taught that we cannot become whole by denying parts of ourselves, but only by integrating them, by bringing them into consciousness, by recognizing that even our so-called flaws and weaknesses contain gifts and wisdom when properly understood and channeled. The fourth stage of transformation is what we might call the integration and embodiment of wisdom. This is when the lessons of the crisis begin to settle into your bones, when the insights you gained in the darkness become the foundation of your new life, when you start to embody the truth you have discovered rather than just intellectually understanding it. This is the stage where authentic spirituality moves from being a concept or belief system to being a lived reality, where your actions naturally align with your values because there is no longer any separation between who you are and how you show up in the world. Hall emphasized that true wisdom is not about accumulating knowledge or impressive spiritual experiences, but about the transformation of character, the development of virtues like courage, compassion, integrity, and humility. He taught that the goal of spiritual development is not to escape the world or transcend the human condition, but to become fully human, to incarnate spiritual principles in practical everyday living, to be a light in the world through the quality of your presence rather than through any special powers or abilities. During this integration phase, you may find that you have a completely different relationship with life itself. Things that used to trigger intense reactions in you barely register now. Situations that would have sent you into crisis before are met with equanimity and wisdom. You find yourself less interested in drama, less invested in being right, less concerned with what others think of you. This is not because you have become cold or detached, but because you have found a deeper source of fulfillment within yourself, a connection to something vast and eternal that puts all the temporary ups and downs of life into proper perspective. Hall called this state the philosophical life, not philosophy in the academic sense, but in the ancient sense of being a lover of wisdom, someone who has tasted truth and can never again be satisfied with illusion. You begin to see the sacred in the ordinary, to recognize the divine pattern underlying all of existence, to sense the interconnection of all things. Life becomes less about getting what you want and more about participating fully in what is, less about controlling outcomes and more about responding wisely to whatever arises, less about personal achievement and more about contribution to the greater whole. This transformed relationship with life also changes how you relate to future crises and challenges. You recognize that difficulty is not a sign that you are doing something wrong, but often a sign that you are growing, stretching into new territory, becoming more than you were. You develop what we might call spiritual resilience, not the ability to avoid pain or hardship, but the capacity to move through them without losing your center, without abandoning yourself, without regressing into old patterns. You understand viscerally what Hall taught conceptually, that the universe is a school and we are here to learn, that every experience contains teaching, that there are no mistakes, only lessons, that what we call failure is often the most valuable teacher we will ever have. This does not mean you become passive or stop setting goals and working toward them, but it does mean you hold your goals more lightly. You remain flexible and open. You recognize that the path to your destination may look very different than you imagined, and that sometimes what you thought was your destination was actually just a way station on the journey to something far greater than you could have conceived. One of the most profound teachings Hall offered was about the difference between personality and individuality. Personality, he taught, is the social mask we construct, the persona we present to the world, the collection of habits and reactions and learned behaviors that we mistake for our true self. Individuality, by contrast, is the immortal essence within us, the spark of divinity, the unique expression of universal consciousness that we truly are. Most people go through their entire lives developing a stronger and stronger personality, becoming more and more identified with their masks, never suspecting that this is moving them further away from their true individuality rather than toward it. The crisis that forces the collapse of personality is therefore a tremendous gift because it creates the possibility of discovering individuality, of connecting with that eternal aspect of yourself that was never born and will never die, that exists beyond time and space. that is both uniquely you and simultaneously one with all that is. When you touch this level of your being, even briefly, everything changes. The fear of death loses its grip because you recognize yourself as that which cannot die. The need for external validation disappears because you are connected to a source of value within yourself that is infinite and unconditional. The compulsion to constantly do and achieve relaxes because you recognize that your worth is not based on your accomplishments, but is inherent in your very existence. Hall was deeply influenced by the Hermetic principle of correspondence, the teaching that patterns repeat across all levels of reality, that the same laws operate in the spiritual realm, the mental realm, and the physical realm. He recognized that the crisis and transformation that occur in an individual life mirror the crisis and transformation that occur in civilizations, in nature, in the cosmos itself. Death and rebirth, dissolution and reformation, chaos and new order, these are fundamental patterns woven into the fabric of existence. Nothing remains static. Everything is in constant flux. All forms eventually dissolve so that new forms can emerge. When we resist this natural process, when we cling desperately to what is dying, we create unnecessary suffering for ourselves. But when we align ourselves with these cosmic rhythms, when we learn to let go with grace, to surrender what is complete, to trust the process of renewal, we move through life with much greater ease and wisdom. The crisis we experience individually is teaching us in microcosm what is true in macrocosm, that transformation is not only inevitable, but necessary, that what appears to be destruction is often actually creative renewal, that endings always contain within them the seeds of new beginnings. The fifth stage of transformation, which Hall sometimes called the return to the world, is when you take the wisdom gained through your crisis and begin to share it, to contribute it, to let it inform how you show up and what you create in the world. This is not about becoming a teacher in the formal sense, though some people do follow that path. It is more about recognizing that your transformation has value not only for you but for the collective, that the work you have done on yourself ripples out and affects everyone you encounter, that by becoming more authentic, more conscious, more aligned, you are actually serving the evolution of human consciousness itself. Hall taught that every person who completes the journey of transformation becomes what he called a light bearer, someone who carries the light of consciousness into the darkness of unconsciousness, not through preaching or proselytizing, but simply through the quality of their presence, through their example, through the way they move through life. You may find that without trying to teach or change anyone, people begin to be drawn to you, to ask you questions, to sense something different about you that they want to understand. This is not because you are special or superior, but because you have done the work that most people are too afraid to do. You have faced what most people are running from. You have integrated what most people keep split off and denied. In this return phase, you may also feel called to some form of service or contribution that directly addresses the suffering you once experienced. Having been through the dark night, you can now be a guide for others who find themselves there. Having survived the crisis, you can now offer hope to those who are in the midst of theirs. This is the archetypal pattern of the wounded healer, the one who transforms their own suffering into medicine for others. Hall believed that this is part of the hidden purpose of suffering, that it is not meaningless or random, but is actually preparing us to serve, giving us the depth and compassion and wisdom we need to truly help others, rather than just offering superficial advice or empty platitudes. The person who has never been broken cannot help others put themselves back together. The person who has never been lost cannot guide others out of the wilderness. The person who has never questioned everything cannot help others navigate their own existential crisis. Your wound becomes your gift, your crisis becomes your calling, your breakdown becomes your breakthrough not only for yourself, but for all those whose lives you will touch. There is a beautiful teaching in the mystery traditions about the phoenix, that mythical bird that periodically builds a nest, sets it on fire, and is consumed in the flames only to rise from its own ashes reborn, renewed, transformed. Hall often used this symbol to explain the process of spiritual transformation through crisis. The old self must be completely consumed, burned away, destroyed before the new self can emerge. There is no way to shortcut this process, no way to transform without the fire, no way to be reborn without first dying. The person you are becoming cannot coexist with the person you have been. They cannot occupy the same space simultaneously. One must give way to the other, and the transition between them is the crisis, the fire, the dark night. But what emerges from this fire is not less than what went in but more, not diminished but enhanced, not broken but refined like gold that has had all its impurities burned away. You become more yourself, more authentic, more aligned with your true nature and purpose. The masks have been burned away, leaving only essence. The false has been consumed, leaving only truth. The constructed has been destroyed, revealing the eternal. Hall also spoke extensively about the concept of initiation in the ancient mystery schools. Initiation was not a certificate or a title, but an actual transformation of consciousness, a death and rebirth experience that permanently altered how the initiate perceived reality and themselves. The modern world has largely lost these initiatory traditions, these rites of passage that helped people navigate major life transitions, and as a result, many people are going through initiations without recognizing them as such, without having any context or support for the profound changes they are experiencing. Hall believed that many of the crises we face in modern life are actually uninitiated initiations, that they contain all the elements of the ancient mystery school initiations, but we do not have the framework to understand them or the community to support us through them. When we reframe crisis as initiation, when we recognize that we are being called into a higher level of consciousness, when we understand that the dissolution we are experiencing is preparing us for a greater life, it changes everything. We can endure almost anything if we believe it has meaning and purpose. We can bear tremendous suffering if we trust it is transforming us into something greater. But meaningless suffering, suffering we believe is random or punitive or pointless, that is almost unbearable, and often drives people to despair or bitterness. The Hermetic tradition teaches that solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate, break down and rebuild. This is the fundamental pattern of transformation. Whether we are talking about chemical processes in alchemy, psychological processes in personal development, or spiritual processes in awakening. First, something must be broken down into its component parts, returned to prima materia, the prime matter, the raw material. Then it can be reconstituted in a higher form, structured according to a more refined pattern, organized around a more conscious principle. This is exactly what happens in crisis. Your old life structure dissolves, your old identity breaks down, your old beliefs and values are questioned and often discarded. You return to a kind of psychological and spiritual prima materia, a state of not knowing who you are or what you believe or where you are going. This is terrifying, because we are conditioned to always know, to always have answers, to always have a solid sense of self. But this dissolution is not the end of the process, but the middle, the necessary preparation for what comes next. From this prima materia, from this state of openness and possibility, a new structure begins to emerge. But this time it is not imposed from outside by society or family or culture. This time it emerges from within, organized around your true self, aligned with your authentic values, structured to support the unique expression of consciousness that you are. If you are going through a crisis right now, if you are in that dark place where everything feels broken and hopeless, I want you to know that what you are experiencing, as painful as it is not the end, but the beginning. You are not being destroyed but refined. You are not falling apart but falling together in a new way. Everything that is leaving your life, no matter how much you wanted to keep it, is making space for something more aligned with who you truly are. Every belief that is being shattered was probably never true to begin with, but was simply something you were taught or told or conditioned to accept. Every relationship that is ending was probably never serving your highest good, but was based on mutual dysfunction or codependency or some other unhealthy dynamic. Every aspect of your old life that is dissolving was probably never really yours, but was something you took on to please others, or fit in, or be safe. This crisis, as devastating as it feels, is actually the universe clearing away everything that is false, so that what is true can finally be seen and lived and expressed. Hall would tell you not to fight this process, not to resist the dissolution, not to desperately try to put things back the way they were. He would encourage you to surrender to the transformation, to trust the wisdom of the process, to have faith that even though you cannot see where this is leading, there is an intelligence at work that is guiding you toward your highest potential. As we come toward the end of our time together, I want to return to the central insight that took me so long to understand, but that Hall knew from the beginning of his work. Crisis is not the opposite of spiritual growth, but often its primary catalyst. Comfort and ease rarely produce transformation. It is through challenge, difficulty, loss, and suffering that we are forced to question our assumptions, face our shadows, let go of our illusions, and discover who we really are beneath all the conditioning. This does not mean we should seek out suffering or romanticize pain, but it does mean that when crisis comes, as it inevitably will for everyone at some point, we have a choice about how we meet it. We can view it as random misfortune, as punishment, as evidence that we are doing something wrong, or we can view it as Hall did, as an invitation to transformation, as a call from our own soul to step into greater authenticity, as an opportunity to die to what is false and be reborn into what is true. The choice is not whether we will experience crisis, but whether we will allow it to transform us, or will resist the transformation and remain stuck in our suffering. The journey through crisis to transformation is not a straight line but a spiral. You may revisit similar themes multiple times throughout your life, each time at a deeper level, each time with greater wisdom and understanding. This is not because you failed the first time, but because human development is ongoing, because there are always deeper layers to explore, because consciousness is infinite, and our evolution within it never ends. Hall spent his entire life studying and writing about these mysteries, and even at the end of his long life, he said he felt he had barely scratched the surface. The mysteries are inexhaustible. The depths of consciousness are fathomless. The journey of self-discovery has no final destination but is an eternal unfolding. Each crisis you successfully navigate prepares you for the next one. Each transformation you complete opens the door to another one. Each death and rebirth you experience makes you more resilient, more wise, more capable of holding greater levels of consciousness and living from higher levels of truth. I want to acknowledge how vulnerable and courageous you are to even be here with this message. Most people are so afraid of looking at these deeper questions, so invested in maintaining their illusions, so terrified of the transformation that crisis demands, that they will go to great lengths to avoid any teaching that might disturb their comfortable sleep. The fact that you are here, that you are willing to consider these ideas, that you are open to the possibility that your crisis might actually be the best thing that ever happened to you, tells me that you are one of the seekers, one of the souls who is committed to truth even when truth is uncomfortable, one of the warriors who is willing to face the darkness, because you know that on the other side of it lies the light. The path of transformation is not for the faint of heart, but then again, you are not faint of heart or you would not be here. You have what it takes to make this journey because the fact that the journey has begun for you means you have been chosen by your own soul to undertake it. Not everyone receives this call, or perhaps everyone receives it but not everyone is ready to answer. You are answering, and that makes all the difference.